We come to the 18th presentation in this year-long excursion into what is entitled Parayana. And the title Parayana comes from a collection of remembered sayings of the Buddha that were woven together. There were 16 of them, and they became the core with resonant other verses. They became known as the Parayana. In the Buddha's time, the word para meant not what we understand today as beyond, like paradise, the old Persian, is beyond this worldly order, or paranormal, beyond the normal. Para in Sanskrit had the sense of across a space that is not a part of the form, either where you have gone from and where you have arrived. So that the sense of a Parayana, yana is way. The Mahayana is the great way. The Vajrayana is the diamond, jewel way. The Parayana was the way across a gulf that where we are in this world has in fact a shore. It has what we would call a boundary. And that the boundedness of the world extends itself so that when you're a toddler, you have gone beyond the world of the crib and of crawling. And when you're able to be more mature, you keep extending the boundaries. And so what is characteristic all the way through as a theme is boundedness gives us the world in which we live, in which we have our concourse and discourse and intercourse and so forth. The Parayana is going across from the boundedness as a shore, no matter how extensive that boundary is, it can be visioned as a shore. And to leave that shore and go across is indeed super perilous because it is supernatural. It has a quality of going over a gap that is unfathomable, that has no boundedness, is in fact the visionary field of infinity. When an Englishman who fought in the Second World War got fed up with all of the carnage and war, he was in North India, and he eventually discovered the Sutras of the Buddha. The written down form, sutra means thread. It means the written sayings of the Buddha, this written way in which the oral teachings of the Buddha were of the world of that time, but the sutras carry it beyond the shores of the world of that time to further boundedness, or can carry it to the other shore, which is always an impossible possibility. when one is working not just with truths of the world, dharma, but one is able to do an adventurous excursion, Parayana, across into the other shore. Now one has a high dharma. One recognizes if there's another shore, then all shores, including this new one, need to be taken with a great breath. The original Upanishad, called the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Brihad in Sanskrit means great breath. The Aranyaka in Sanskrit means forest teaching. And the great breath forest teaching begins its Parayana by saying, that sun up there is the eye of a horse. The wind blowing the clouds is the mane of that horse. And so the entire sky of our world is a horse by which we can ride beyond, further. And that's how the Upanishads began, like that. The author of this little collection of books, Crossing the Stream, another word for the boundary is that this is a stream. That boundary is not etched in stone. It's not drawn on the land. It's not even circumscribed in the mind, but it's a stream. The way in which stream in this way comes into the Western usage, this is the Buddhist usage, but the Western usage is from William James, where he used the term stream of consciousness. That consciousness, as a stream, has the ability to take us out of the boundaries of time, out of the measurements of time. And one of his close friends, Henri Bergson, the great French philosopher around the turn of the 20th century, as William James was as well, used the term durée, meaning that there is a creative time which is a flow and is like a stream of consciousness. And William James took up the phrase in English, stream of consciousness, crossing the stream. And bhikshu is someone who has learned to live by this. His name in Sanskrit, Sangha Rakshita, means the one who is able to really understand by being able to live it in a new key, and that new key is one that one has crossed the threshold of the previous compositional limitations, and now one has come through the doorway. He writes about pauses and empty spaces, and just a paragraph or so. When the composer Mozart was asked what was the most important part of his music, he did not reply that melody or harmony or counterpoint or even orchestration was the most important, but simply the pauses. As in the music of Mozart, so in the paintings of the Far Eastern, China and Japan, masters of landscape art, it is the empty spaces which are the most important parts of the picture. The vast empty space of sky or snow or water are not only themselves charged with mysterious significance as a cloud with lightning, but they somehow infuse that significance into the single blossomless branch or the tiny floating boat or solitary human figure which stands almost lost at the edge or in the center of the huge blank expanse of paper or faintly tainted silk. the most important empty spaces are those that we encounter as we are encountering here. In the way across, the way beyond, although beyond now is overused in this particular time period. Our first 17 presentations in Parayana were subentitled Entering Our High Dharma Way. With the 18th, we now modify this, change this, to Coursing in the Great Way, because we are now taking a cue from the earliest of the refinements of classical Buddhism from the Dharma into the really high Dharma, the Mahayana, the Great Way. And the key to it, the doorway which will be open to it, is the way in which there is a weaving of great traditions of civilization that came together for the first time as a fabric that would take the impress of all of the images, of all of the myths, of all of the symbols, and bring them forth into a larger openness, the farther shore of which was something that was described in a book called the Pistis Sophia. And we will get to that in a couple of presentations. Pistis in Greek is faith, and Sophia is wisdom. The faith is masculine, the wisdom is feminine. The book of faith wisdom, and the first of the Mahayana books to be written by Asvaghosha about 90 AD, about the time that the Hermetica were being begun in Alexandria, about the time that the Council of Jamnia was beginning rabbinic Judaism, about the time that St. John had been taken to Rome by Domitian and tried to be killed and could not, and so was exiled to the island of Patmos off the coast, there to be left to rot and there to write the book of Revelation, the Apocalypse. All of these things happening at the same time in far west, what was then beginning to be a Britain. The cup of the Last Supper fell out of the mitochondria heritage of the DNA of the Buddhist family going back 2,000 years. Fell out, and the last survivors, the elder brother, took that cup back to where it should have been. And at that time, it was very difficult because the whole tradition in its viability rested on St. John. He was the last living person who was of the Buddhist family in a masculine way, who was directly capable. And so, being exiled, in exile on Patmos, he was unable to receive. The man's name was Bran, or Bran. And Bran is always called the Blessed. Bran the Blessed, because he was able to bring that cup back to where it was supposed to be, to whom it really now would belong, because St. John was a spirit son of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. had been adopted as the last act on the cross in crucifixion and became the first act in the resurrection of identifying and emerging to Mary Magdalene, who became the spirit mother of St. John. All of these things happening about 90 AD. All of these aspects occurring. And what we're taking a look at is how the threads of what needs to still be written and read and understood are so disparate now and almost unknown that it has been impossible for anyone to have a realization that is real. For instance, have you ever heard of Sundari Nanda? Sundari Nanda. This is from an introduction. There's a short introduction of all of the poems, the prayer poems, the psalms of the female followers of the Buddha, collected together from the disparate Pali texts and put together as a collection and translated into English in 1909. And the woman who did this, her name was Caroline, and she had a beautiful couple of middle names, Augusta Foley. And she married Thomas, or T.W. Rhys Davids. And Rhys Davids was an intellectual Welsh savant who was studying Buddhism. And so his wife, they met, and within weeks they were married. And both of them did monumental translations from the 1890s into the 1920s. Caroline lived to 1942. She was born in 1857. She writes about Sundari Nanda. She verily was born in the time of Padumuttara Buddha, and this is an ancient Buddha before our historical Buddha, and she then was reborn in the time of our historical Buddha 2,500 years ago, and she was the half-sister of the Buddha. Did you know that he had a half-sister? That she was the most beautiful woman of her time? She was the great beauty of her time? And when the son of the Buddha, Rahula, joined the Buddha, his community, and all of the other relatives joined, even the mother of Sundari Nanda, Prajapati, was joining. It wasn't until Sundara Nanda realized, looking into a mirror as she so often did so long, that she was aging. And she went to her half-brother who received her. Behold, Nanda, the foul compound, diseased, impure, compel thy heart to contemplate what is not fair to view. So steel thyself and concentrate the well-composed mind. And she, replying, and this is the hymn of the Theravada, even I have seen inside and out this body as in truth it really is. Who ought to know the what and why of it, with zeal unfaltering and ardor fired. Now for the body care I nevermore, and all my consciousness is passion-free, keen with unfettered zeal, detached, calm and serene, I taste nirvana's peace. It is this peace that is featured in what is called the Psalms of the Sisters. And Caroline Rhys Davies put together all of the Psalms of the early Buddhist women. And they were called the Psalms of the Sisters. The sisters were called Theri, Theri. And the men were called Theras. And she combined with the Psalms of the Sisters, the Psalms of the Brethren, and they were finally published in the Polytext Society translation series as one volume in 1994. It's the first time they were put together. The early volumes were separate. Psalms of the Sisters and Psalms of the Brethren were called Psalms of the Elders. It's interesting to see, as we begin to understand, that when the genders are not seen in symmetry, are not seen in the not just the unity, but in the fertility of resonance, which then includes all kinds of variations of gender. It in fact includes all kinds of inconceivably lucid realization that there are genders beyond number in the cosmos. That there are worlds beyond counting in the cosmos. And that the proliferation of boundednesses is indefinite, but not infinite. However many, however large that number, it is in fact a number. It is only the spaces in between that are infinite, because it is the field in which they occur. And that field in which they occur can be fertile. And that fertile field, that zero field that is capable of spontaneously emerging number without end, is Mother Nature. And that infinite field of consciousness is the fertilizer of Mother Nature, in keeping with the symmetry of the way Mother Nature is able to become fertile through Father consciousness. That begs the fact that women, the feminine, are really the wisdom. This is a great discovery. When one comes to understand that Sanskrit is a made-up Indo-European language, ancient though it is, it came into being with the putting together of the Rig Veda about 1500 BC. And the 10 parts of the Rig Veda constitute about 1,000 hymns, 1,065 hymns in 10 books, 10 sections. And out of these, it's the 6th section that is really the earliest of the Rig Veda. But the Rig Veda is a confirmation of the fact that there are invaders that have come into India from beyond. They, in fact, have come into India through a great pass called the Khyber Pass. And if one went the other way on the Khyber Pass from northwest India, now Pakistan, one would come through the Khyber Pass and out about a day and a half's journey, one would come to Kabul, what is today Afghanistan. And it was there in ancient, before it was Kabul, before it was Afghanistan, that the ancient Avestan language from Central Asia was brought together in a collection of sacred songs, of hymns, of prayers by the ancient classical Zarathustra in his Gathas. So that in Avestan, Gatha in Sanskrit becomes Gita. In the Avestan, mantra in Sanskrit becomes mantra. And so on, that the Sanskrit language of those people coming from an Avestan language, Central Asian origin, come into an India no earlier than about 1600 BC. And when they came into India, originally, 100 years before collected together Sanskrit in the Rig Veda, that Indian civilization was already millennia old. That the native persons in that area of northwest India, that civilization originally was called the Indus River civilization, or just the Indus civilization. Later on, when archaeology began to proliferate, and its great advance was in the 1920s, the great archaeologist who founded all of that was Sir John Marshall. And there are 3 volumes of this classic, Mohenjo-Daro and the Indus Civilization. As it went on, we realized archaeologically that the original city was Harappa. And so Harappan civilization took over from the Indus civilization. And here's the first volume of Harappan Studies by the great author of the Harappan civilization, Gregory Possehl. It is important to understand, as Sir John Marshall wrote in the preface to his great 3-volume The Indus Civilization, hitherto it has commonly been supposed that the pre-Aryan peoples of India were on an altogether lower plane of civilization than their Aryan conquerors, that to the latter they were much what the Helots were to the Spartans, or the Slavs to their Byzantine overlords, a race so servile and degraded that they were commonly known as dasas, or slaves. The picture of them gleaned from the hymns of the Rig Veda was that of black-skinned, flat-nosed barbarians, as different from the fair Aryans in physical aspect as they were in speech and religion, though at the same time it was evident that they must have been rich in cattle, good fighters, possessed of many forts in which they defended themselves against the invaders. These forts, however, were explained by Vedic scholars as being no more than occasional places of refuge. They were refuge because the original civilization, the India civilization, the Harappan, the Indus civilization, had no warrior class. There were no kshatras. They had no sophisticated armor. They did not have the sword. Their great cities, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, and many lesser cities, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa were cities of hundreds of thousands of people, 1,000 years before the Aryans came into India through the Khyber Pass. And in order for those Aryan invaders, and the invaders were spearheaded, as usually it is, just like in the Ukraine today, spearheaded by the military. We have the swords, and we have the training, and you are fodder. The Harappan Indus civilization built a great stupa at the mouth of the Khyber Pass, and it was dedicated to Sphota, which is the mysterious silence out of which sound spontaneously first emerges. That the conch shells of the warriors can only be heard in the silence that is real. One of the great pauses in world civilization is in the Mahabharata, the great India war that was fought not in the Indus civilization, but further to the east. Fought outside of the river tributary confines of the Indus civilization, along the banks of another river system, the Ganges and the Jumna. Along the northern part of the Jumna is where Kurukshetra is, that is the field of the battle in the Mahabharata, in which the centerpiece of it at its very beginning is the Bhagavad Gita. And the Bhagavad Gita has all the conch shells being blown, and all of the elephants trumpeting, and all of the Bronze Age warriors with their shields and swords, and this great melee of two great armies. And in the center of that, Arjuna's chariot, with Krishna as the charioteer, drives in, and in the split-second pause, the entire Bhagavad Gita dialogue takes place. Let's take a little break.